Follow the Money Investor Group is a 100% Indigenous-owned company and certified with the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business.
Dan?
Hey, great to see you.
Every morning drive starts with a handshake.
Absolutely, absolutely.
This is not your first morning drive with me,
No, it's not.
so you might be a little more comfortable. But you're an easy person to talk to. But you know what? We haven't really talked about you as an individual.
Right.
So that's kind of what the purpose of this one today. And
Okay.
before we get going, I just want to remind everyone that if you are enjoying this, if you enjoy this morning drive with Dan, please go in the description below and sign up for the town hall webinar that Ashley will be hosting with Dan.
There we go. Looking forward to that.
So where are you from, Dan?
I grew up in Manitoba. So I was born in Brandon, Manitoba, and grew up between Brandon and Winnipeg. We moved to Winnipeg when I was in grade 6.
Grade 6. Okay.
Lifelong Winnipeg Jets fan.
Yeah.
So, you know.
So it's been a long go, like the Leafs.
Well, they are at the top of the standings right now. So,
Okay.
you know, we got to give a little bit of credit to the team. But
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Did you have any siblings growing up?
I did, yeah. I'm the youngest of 3, so oldest is my brother, and my sister, obviously a couple years older than me.
What would you say are the advantages and disadvantages to being the baby?
It's a good question. You know, I got to remember kind of growing up in the 70s and 80s. Parenting styles. My parents were fantastic parents, but you know, when you're the youngest of 3, by the time you really start getting into anything that's going to be remotely controversial, by and large, your siblings have kind of paved the way for you, right? So there's not many mistakes that haven't been made in the family by the time you get there. And both my brother and sister went away to university. So for the last 2 years that I was at home for high school, you know, my parents had been parenting at that point for, you know, 20-something years, and they were kind of looking forward to the empty nest, I think, in the end. So you get cut a lot of slack, and I think, you know, that's good. I think as the youngest, you tend to have less pressure on you.
Yeah.
Than your siblings. You know, particularly, it would be different if you were like, you know, if I was the only boy. That might be different, particularly in that kind of growing up in the 70s and 80s context. But no, I think I have genuinely felt a little bit less pressure, and gives you a lot more kind of freedom, I think, to kind of be who you are.
Yeah.
So.
And any downsides?
Well, you know, other than the usual, you know, sibling bullying that happens.
Yeah.
You're always smaller than everyone else, and you always kind of have to wait for everything else, and live your life with a reasonable amount of hand-me-downs and things like that. But that's, you know, nothing for me. Not really. I mean, we had a pretty good family life, so you know, yeah, I was very lucky that way.
What about music? Were you a big music guy?
Very into music. I was very into music. I actually, in university for 3 years, had a radio show.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of the music we listened to, particularly in high school.
Oh, where was university?
Queen's University in
So
Kingston, Ontario.
Okay.
Yeah. Kind of halfway between Toronto and Montreal.
Yeah.
So, that's in high school, particularly, like a lot of mid to late 80s, listened to a lot of like old school rap, old school hip hop.
Oh yeah, like were you talking late 80s, early 90s?
Yeah, I really kind of call it from the mid 80s. So
Like the beginning.
Like the beginning. So, you know, like Public Enemy and Ice-T, and you know, not quite back to, you know, the very, very beginnings, and although you know, I used to listen to Grandmaster Flash and
that's cool.
You know, stuff like that. But really, as that kind of became a new medium, that was kind of what we listened to.
Wow.
So,
yeah, that's cool. Now, did you like grunge music?
Yes.
Because you would have been, you know, I don't know how old you are, and I'm not asking, but I'm thinking you would have been at a pretty good point in your life to really enjoy Nirvana and Pearl Jam and all that.
Well, yeah. So I, entered university in 1989. Graduated 1993. So what that,
Boom.
if you track that,
the beginning.
really from that point when I hit university, a lot of what we used to listen to is the Tragically Hip, because we were actually in Kingston
Yeah.
when the hip really broke.
Yeah.
So that would kind of describe most of the first half of the 90s for me, but that very, very into, into music, into live music, like,
Yeah.
that was, if I had one main extracurricular activity. I took my first bonus from investment banking in 1994, and I was working in New York at the time, but I went down to Sam Ash Music on 48th Street, which I have no idea if it's there or not anymore, but quite a famous,
Nice.
guitar store
Yeah.
in New York, and I bought myself like an electric guitar and an amp and a bass guitar, which I still own. And that was sort of my big treat to myself. So.
Have you and Paul had any jam sessions?
I have not really played with Paul, partly because Paul is a very good guitarist. I'm like a reasonable chord strummer, and I can play and sing reasonably well, which I think some people sort of have trouble with. But no, Paul is quite an accomplished guitarist. So, but we did have we had a bit of a session in our office at Christmas, not last year, but the year before. I think it was Christmas. Might have been when the AGM was on, and Paul brought a couple of guitars into the office, and James Maxwell in our office is quite an accomplished guitarist as well.
Okay.
So, yeah, I would have struggled to keep up with those two. So,
Well, shout out to those two.
yeah, no, they're absolutely.
So you're out of university.
Yeah,
It sounds like you headed to investment banking in the U.S.
yeah, started.
How did you get that opportunity?
That was kind of through on-campus recruiting. A lot of the big investment banks came to try and find people to join their analyst programs, which is kind of like a 2-year. We call it, not like paid internship, but almost, where, the expectations at the time were you're really like giving up your life for a couple of years. And, we'll give you 5 years experience and 2 years on the job. And then a typical path would have been, you either find another job after that, often with a lot of the clients that you would have worked with.
Yeah.
Or, a lot of people would then go back to MBA school and then look to come back into the industry.
So what did you end up doing after?
So after I was at Morgan Stanley for 2 years, and after that I joined a little private equity investing group. It was basically a family office
In New York?
Toronto.
Okay.
So I was a year in New York and then a year in Toronto. That was kind of the deal for the Canadian kids that were on that program.
Okay.
So and then I went to join this investment fund, which I learned a lot working there as well. And they were, again, kind of a client of ours at Morgan Stanley, and was looking for, someone to help them deploy a little more capital. And so we were there for I guess I was there for about a year and a half. And then that ended up, basically with a little bit of conflict between the investor and the family whose capital it was that we were deploying, and so they ended up shutting that down. And I took from that at the end of 1996 what was, for me a pretty sizable severance. Call it $10,000, and I decided I was going to go traveling around the world, and made it pretty much all the way around the world on that $10,000. So. Ended up in Asia for about 3 months, traveling through Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, China, Hong Kong, and then I took a train from there to Moscow to Beijing, from Beijing to Moscow, and then to St. Petersburg. And I had started studying Russian language at the time, and so ended up in St. Petersburg in late March, early April, and was in St. Petersburg for 3 months studying Russian, and actually acquired a reasonable level of language for the time that I was there, but have since lost most of it.
So before I continue on in your now professional career, since you saw most of the world, and I'm sure later in your life you've traveled, what's your favorite place on the planet?
Oh.
And why?
That's a very difficult question.
Or places and
yeah.
But
no, there's, one of the things I think that I've learned as I've traveled is there's something pretty amazing about almost everywhere in the world that you just kind of have to look for it. So, but for me, there's a couple of places very close to my heart. One of them is I was there last weekend at the top of the Blackcomb Glacier.
Oh, Whistler?
At Whistler.
Yeah.
And kind of looking from there and out into a great expanse of what was a very good snow last weekend. So, but it's just, kind of that big high alpine
the view.
Terrain, and the view is something that's pretty close to my heart. I have a very soft spot for France. I've lived in France a few times. I was there to do the second half of my third year of university in 1992. I was there for 3 months studying French before I did my MBA. In 2000, and then I lived just south of Paris for a year from 2000 to 2001 doing my MBA at INSEAD. So I have a very soft spot for French culture, and again, it's a place. There's a lot of amazing parts of France, but I love the mountains, and so the French Alps, Val d'Isère, and a town called Annecy, which is just south of Geneva, which is where I studied French for 3 months. It's a place that's very, very close to my heart, but we could talk for an hour about places that I've been and places that I loved and places that I'd love to go, because there's still a lot of the world I haven't seen.
So you take the severance, you travel the world, then what?
Then you run out of money. And as it turns out, a bunch of the team that I'd worked for at Morgan Stanley had moved to Credit Suisse after I had left. And they were looking for someone to come and join the team, so I kind of got recruited back to Toronto and was at Credit Suisse for about 2.5 years through the end of 1999.
Okay. Just a reminder, if you're enjoying this morning drive today with Dan and I, please go in the description below. Dan will give you the finger sign right now, and sign up for the town hall webinar.
That finger sign, so we're clear. Yeah. Exactly. So decided that I'd kind of wanted to go back to school in the late 90s. So applied and got into INSEAD, which is an international business school. And it was kind of the thing that I was looking for, was an international program. So we were 300 people in our promotion from 55 different countries, basically living in community, an hour south of Paris. So a fantastic year. So many of my great friends in this world I made during that year. And from there, when we graduated, came out, and it was after the dot-com bust. There really were no investment banking jobs to be found, because all the banks were, in one of their kind of every 7 to 10 year real retrenchments. So I actually got a job that I was very excited about, working at General Electric, doing acquisitions work, mostly for businesses that GE now no longer owns. So it was a lot of GE capital. And we were kind of a group based in London, and a lot of ex-INSEAD investment bankers, as it turns out. And we were kind of like a business development support group that worked with other GE businesses across Europe to help them execute mostly on acquisitions. We talk about M&A at GE, but the reality is GE never sold anything, they only bought. So it's a really interesting experiences there. Worked with some phenomenal people. Really learned a lot there. But you learned at GE that like the real drive was toward ultimately, you help a company acquire some business, and then there's kind of a path to call it line management. So you'd ultimately the goal was you go and get your own P&L, your own business that you manage. And then that launches the rest of your career at GE. And it got to the point where, we're kind of starting to have those discussions with a couple of the businesses that I'd been working with. And at the same time, I'd been out of Canada for almost 5 years and in my early 30s, and was having to kind of start making those decisions about, like, am I ever really going to go back to Canada? And so around
And had you met a partner at that point, or no?
No, not at that point. But had a couple of relationships that were, starting to get reasonably close, that had they progressed, definitely would have anchored me in Europe for a long time. So, but in the end, it was actually, one of my career mentors who I'd worked for at Morgan Stanley and at Credit Suisse, who had moved to National Bank. And he kind of heard that I was maybe thinking about coming home, and called me and said, so I hear from a mutual friend that you're thinking about coming home. I said, well, thinking about it. He said, you ever thought about Vancouver? Like, would Vancouver work? And I said, well, I'd love to live in Vancouver. I had a number of good friends who'd moved out of here after university. But there are very few investment banking jobs in Vancouver. And particularly, you remember 2004, like, the mining business had been miserable for, at that point, probably 7 years. But he said, well, I think I can probably help on the job front. And so lo and behold, I came out here in late 2003 and met a few people and interviewed for a job at National Bank, and then I got the job. So moved out here in May of 2004, and here we are today. And days like this, if people have been able to see out the back what it looks like outside, you would understand why one really wants to live in Vancouver. So
yeah, Whistler's an hour away, hour and 20, 30.
Hour and a half, yeah, for sure. So that opportunity came, and then just and I was sort of being a generalist, vice president, origination and execution guy, just trying to drum up business for the corporate finance group. And it was about the time that the mining sector started booming again.
Yeah, so relatively good timing.
Good timing, and for me, it just so happened that I spoke enough mining to be dangerous, so I started working with some of the guys who were running the mining group in Toronto, and just kind of as, free resource, I'll, can be boots on the ground, let me help, just try and be a good partner. And at the time, 2004, 2005, it really started taking off, and I got to know, a few people who were, really kind of launching their own careers in mining, are really kind of having their first big wins. So, people like Mark O'Day and Paul Matisic, and, some great entrepreneurs who I had the privilege of working with. And we ended up building a very interesting business here. And then 2007, I became the head of the mining group at National Bank for what ended up being about 4 or 5 years, until National acquired Wellington West. But, just kind of put our head down and really helped finance a lot of single asset companies. Lots of working with project developers, help them access equity capital, and then ultimately, help them find strategic partners, or usually in the form of selling their projects or selling their companies. So we had a very, very robust financing and M&A business.
That would have been a lot of fun, eh?
Oh, you know what this business is like with a tailwind?
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
No, it was great. It was great times. We really, helped, I think, really helped bring a lot of value to our clients. I think made a pretty interesting business out of it. So, but in 2011, 2012, had done some work with a mining private equity fund called Pacific Road Capital. And they were kind of looking for a succession plan for some of their partners. And so again, one of the partners of the fund said, "Hey, ever thought about maybe going into the, into the investing business?" I thought, yes, I've thought about that, quite a bit. So that opportunity kind of took a little while to come together, but ultimately that came together, and I was a partner at Pacific Road for 5 years. That took us up to kind of 2018. So really enjoyed that. We had about $800 million under management. The markets were challenging, like we all remember what kind of 2012 to 2015, 2016 was like. It was, one of the more challenging markets. Feels a lot like now, except, well, the gold price was $1,000 an ounce, having come down from 1900. So
yeah,
it was a difficult market for sure, but a great opportunity to be deploying capital. Although we were, in some senses, trying to catch falling knives. So learned a lot about investing at that point, but had a couple of pretty interesting successes, including saving a company called Luna Gold from bankruptcy that ended up, being one of the main assets that got folded together to form Equinox Gold. Ross Beatty.
So I got one more question for you.
Yeah.
And it's been a fantastic morning drive. Finger below. Please reminder to sign up for the town hall webinar coming up.
Yep.
In the description below. Now, since you've been in mining now and resources for a long time, and you've been through the markets, the ups and downs, let's leave it with your thoughts on where we are right now, because you can see how robust gold has been in a high inflationary environment and a strong US dollar.
Yep.
The opposite of that $1,900 to $1,000 scenario.
Yep.
But you see where the stocks are.
Yeah.
Where the so the equities. So let's get your opinion, and then after that we'll wrap it up.
All right. Well, I've been doing this for 30 plus years. I've never seen a dislocation like this before. And the real essence of it is you've got producers that are, their share prices, a lot of them are doubled or tripled from lows of the last few years, but they really, it doesn't reflect really the quality of the cash flow that they have. They've all completely repaired their balance sheets. They've never been in a stronger financial position, and yet they have not been investing in their own businesses for years. So, resources are being depleted, and at some point, they are going to need to acquire new projects, because at some point, mines shut.
Right.
Ore bodies hit their limits. And we have this line of sight on a number of gold producers that are likely in the next 5 years going from 2 or 3 producing assets today to 1 producing asset.
Yeah.
And none of them want to be there. So what are they going to need to do? Either go find other, producing assets to acquire. They've all been trying to acquire producing assets over the last 2 or 3 years. There've been a few pretty high profile sales that have happened, but let's say there are 4 or 5, maybe not even that many assets that have sold or are about to be sold. And there's kind of nothing left in behind it. So either they're going to have to merge with each other, which, they've been trying to do for 10 years, and social issues usually get in the way, or valuation issues usually get in the way, or they're going to actually have to start looking at earlier stage projects that they know they're going to have to develop. And that is starting to happen. We're certainly hearing that. And that's where the opportunity comes in here, when you're looking at developers at the same time that are trading at really, as far as I can tell, like advanced stage developers trading at all-time low valuations. Like we're today at $7 an ounce or something like that for 2 5 million ounce plus gold projects in Canada. One of which is, we think, the next one to get environmental assessment approval in the country. So, I think all of that says to me is we've never seen a setup for an M&A market like we have right now, ever. And so it's going to come. We're starting to see it, certainly for Canadian assets, for tier one jurisdictions, big companies are, starting to pay up for those. And so that gives us a lot of confidence that whether it's finding a partner for our projects, whether it's someone who wants to come in and acquire them, when I started this in 2019, started at First Mining in 2019, we always said the goal is to have these projects ready for when the industry needs them the most. And that industry needs them the most point is, I think, at most a year or two away. Like, I think we're getting into an environment where I think you're going to see real competitive tension on good quality assets in tier one jurisdictions, and we've got a lot of those. So exciting times.
Well, I think it's been a very informative morning drive, and that is an exciting lead up to why someone would want to see the value proposition with your projects.
Yep.
What you're going to be doing with Ashley. So we'll leave it there, and one last time, finger down into the description below to sign up and add it into your calendar. I was at Metals Investor Forum yesterday.
Yep.
I saw a great presentation from Rick Rule, which maybe I'll post here in the description as well, where Rick was talking about no excuses for investors at this point.
Yeah.
I don't want to act as if I'm giving advice.
Yep.
So I'll let Rick do it, but he really hammered it. He got me into uranium 5 years ago. And
Oh, wow.
with a great investment thesis there, and made some money. And
Yep.
and I saw the same type of energy and for the gold market and that. So I'm excited to watch your presentation, and I'm sure most of our community members will.
Excellent. Look forward to it. All right. Thanks again.
All right.
Follow the Money Investor Group is a 100% Indigenous-owned company and certified with the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business.